Good morning and welcome to the sermon for Sunday the 20th of September, based on the passage from Matthew chapter 20, the parable of the labourers. I've given it the title Earnings and Blessing. Unequal treatment. I've said it before, but I will say it again. Even young children understand injustice. That's not fair. A nursery class, sensing that one of their number has been hard done by, won't be silent but will point out the fact. Surprisingly, even when redressing the grievance might result in some loss to themselves. Fairness matters, even more than them getting a few more sweets. Sadly, that's something that we tend to lose as we grow up, and the adult world can be so self-centred. We measure so much in an individual sense that fails to take account of the impact that our individual actions have on other people, and indeed on society as a whole. Perhaps we need to take a leaf out of our youngsters' book. Yes, they will have their tantrums, but you get them from heads of states and heads of government who should know better. But the children tend to have a greater appreciation of fairness, or at least of unfairness, and the impact that it has on the well-being of others. You don't need to be around long before we realise that life isn't fair. There will always be those who have more, and if we look, less. Mind you, part of the difficulty is that we're conditioned to measuring so much in monetary terms. How much do we get paid? What do you have to do for it? Hours you put in, and so on. And if we get the chance, we'll be drawn into making comparisons. I remember that working to my advantage. I'd recently started school, age 4 3/4. "Daddy, I was wondering." "Yes," he replied. "Well, the other boys in the class get 6pence for their pocket money, and I get 3pence. Do you think I could get the same?" Well, it worked, and it's the only time in my life that I've negotiated a 100% rise. It was only 3pence, but to a 4-year-old that was a lot. There was actually more of a lesson there than I realised, and it had nothing to do with money, because even then 3pence wasn't exactly a king's ransom. It wasn't anything to do with me asking or demanding or cajoling or worming more out of my dad. It was the fact that my parents wanted the best for me and loved me, and that I didn't earn that love, that they gave it to me freely, and in this instance 6pence a week. And I was to learn that that was always going to be true, even when I didn't get what other children got, even when I knew not to ask. I didn't always see eye to eye on everything then, and Mum will tell you that I don't always now. But some things can't be earned, can't be bought, and yet are priceless. Love being right up there at the top of the list. For those of you who don't know what a 3penny piece looked like, well, it isn't too dissimilar to a modern £1 coin, which probably says a lot about the transitory value of money. Unfair employment practices. Now, I won't pretend that employment practices way back in 1st century Galilee were up to ACAS standards. Far from it. Many people lived a hand-to-mouth existence. Some had small parcels of land, like a very small croft, that they worked personally to eke out an existence. Very few indeed had a trade that might afford them something approaching a comfortable existence. Most engaged in working on the land on a seasonal and day labour basis. And even in these modern, sophisticated days, that still remains the situation for all too many in the world today. A precarious position, made worse by the ravages of the coronavirus this year. In those days, folks would be out sharp in the morning, queuing for work, hoping to be noticed by the foreman, eager to have a chance of a day's work. Do you remember when teams were picked in primary school? You could tell before any name was shouted out who was going to be picked first and who would be left till last. Anything to do with sports, and especially football, and I would be next to last. If it was a quiz team, then I'd have fared better. I've often wondered what my primary school classmates would think of my fitness now and my involvement with Murrayfield for all these years. But let's be honest, for all that you might get used to being left on the sidelines, literally, it isn't fine. To return to the morning huddle hoping for work, it wouldn't have been on a first-come, first-served basis. Almost always it would have been the fittest who were given the work first, or those who'd proved themselves to be reliable in the past, or those who were known to the foreman, or in some cases those who were prepared to give him a backhander out of their meagre wages. But there was a twist to this story Jesus told. In this account, more workers are needed at different points throughout the day. The master returns 2 or 3 times, each time taking on a few more labourers for the same daily rate, a denarius, flat. Even those who were taken on at the 11th hour. At the end of each day, each was called over and paid their money. Some who'd worked a full 12-hour shift grumbled that they were getting paid the same as those who'd only worked for an hour. We worked through the heat of the day. The implication was that was work for nothing. This isn't really a story about employment practices. You can see that those workers might have felt short-changed, albeit contractually their terms had been met. It's got much more to do with the owner's benevolence and concern for people, for their needs, not for the amount of work that they had done. This isn't a story about day rates and rates for part days. It's not about comparisons and being better or worse off relative to somebody else. This is about the owner trying to ensure that as many people as possible went home with some money that would make the difference between the family eating or not eating. Jesus is on about grace, not pay, about blessing, not earnings. Earnings and blessing. There's a fundamental gulf between our way of thinking and God's. For deep down, human beings tend to operate on the basis of what we are owed, whereas God thinks in terms of undeserved love and blessing. We start from the position of what is due to us by rights, whereas God knows that on that basis we're due nothing, for we have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And so, wanting the very best for us, God operates on the basis of grace, of free, undeserved favour. God chooses to bless us and to extend his favour to us, and it's not because he has to, it's because it's in his nature to be loving and forgiving. This takes a bit of getting used to, because everything else in life tends to shape our thinking towards expecting, earning, deserving, rewarding us for our efforts. But when it comes to God, there's nothing that we can do to put him in our debt. He will never stop loving us, but that's his gift, a gift he longs to share. But it's not our entitlement, our due. We can't earn it. It's ours because God has chosen to give us his love and forgiveness through the sacrificial love of his Son, Jesus. That can come home sorely to us if we pride ourselves on our achievements and contributions. What we do will still matter, it's significant, but it does not, nor can it, contribute to our position before God. that's always going to be God's doing, not ours. So we really have to leave all thoughts of earning behind us when it comes to God. God's vocabulary centres around words such as blessing and grace and love, all of which are unearned and come freely through Jesus. Change of outlook. I'm not suggesting that there's no place for workplace bargaining and employment rights. Actually, in the current climate, there's all the more need for care to be taken with looking after the interests of people, whether they're working or not. But I would suggest that that doesn't exhaust matters. There's a need to look out for the interests of everyone, not just for us as number one. God's treatment of us is on the basis not of deserving, but of blessing. Undeserved favour points us in the direction of our responsibility to look after one another, and particularly the vulnerable and those who have little or no voice. Our nation, indeed our planet's health in the widest sense, is more important than how we are faring personally, and certainly more than how much we have in the bank or are being paid. Righteousness alone exalts a nation, to quote the Old Testament. A society mightn't be judged on how well it looks after its most needy people. And there I think we have some way to go, and maybe more so if rumours of our departure from the commitment to spend at least 0.7% of GDP on international development, if these rumours are true. It seems to me that God's grace is needed to transform our outlook from one that's essentially based on self-worth, what we're due, what we have earned, how much we matter as individuals, to one that's centred on who we are in and through Jesus because of his blessing. Only the Spirit of God can make that change. In many ways it's simply a miracle of grace. But where it happens, change happens. People become more valued than things. We begin to notice the needs and concerns of others, and we start to do something about them. We become more collective in our concern, less selfish in our outlook, and it impacts on us and our well-being as well as on others. In short, the world begins to become a better place. Of course, the problems and the challenges are still there, but the way that we look on them, the way we respond is different, more positive. We can't go back to being 4 years old, but maybe we have to become like children so that we recognise injustice, and so we're committed to do something about it, so that we recognise and embrace love and blessing and share in it. I'm not saying that I hope you get a pay rise. However, I will say, and I will mean with all my heart, may the Lord bless you. Amen.